Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4, and today we're going to be looking at the Rush version of the Community Map in a little more detail. The Rush version of Operation Outbreak is, in my opinion, one of the best Battlefield 4 Rush maps there is to be played. Today we will be looking at each set of Mcoms separately, how to go about arming them, what flanks and routes to take, which weapons are ideal for which Mcom set, and how balanced the map is overall. So let's get started with the first set of Mcoms. There's 3 lanes here, 1, 2 and 3, one leading to the objective A, the other leading to objective B, and the last basically being a flanking route for objective B. Now before we get into that last lane, lane 3, let's start off with 1 and 2 because they are similar in nature. They are basically exclusively close quarter. There isn't much here to say other than you basically have to push up and fight the enemy infantry in a kind of a fair one-on-one. Now there is one thing that should be said. Almost all cover is set up facing the direction of the 2 spawns, which means both lanes 1 and 2, or A and B, however you prefer, are extremely susceptible to crossfire. To make an example of this, if a team pushes up on objective A, they can immediately see into the defensive lines for objective B, basically immediately annihilating a large part of the defensive force on the objective they weren't actually directly attacking. Now this is very important to keep in mind for both teams. For the offensive team, obviously this is something they should try to achieve as soon as possible because it is almost a guaranteed victory if the teams are more or less evenly balanced. For the defensive team, this is obviously the thing to watch out and avoid as best as possible. Now lane 3 is probably the lane most often forgotten about by players, which is a shame because it is an extremely effective flank on the B objective. If you can get up to the cover towards the same height as objective B, basically you have a free shot at most of the defending forces defending objective B, which means basically you're setting up crossfire the same way you could from objective A. So an extremely effective position to be in, especially if you can set up a beacon, which allows your teammates to spawn in and kind of attack objective B from that position. So what weaponry is kind of best used in which lane? Well, as we already said, lane 1 and 2 is close quarter, so you're going to be wanting to use high fire rate weapons there. For lane 3, something mid-range is probably slightly better, simply because you're going to have to defend both that position and you're going to have to be attacking forces around objective B, both of which are not that close, however not long distance enough to warrant a long distance weapon. So how do you best get both of these objectives armed? In my opinion, by playing lane 1 and 3. Simple reason for this is crossfire. If you can push up on lane 1 and arm objective A, first of all, you've already got half of your job done. You've got objective A and you've set up crossfire for the defending forces on objective B, which is already going to make their job really, really tough. If you now also set up crossfire coming from lane 3, over onto B, there is almost no place the defending forces can actually still hide, which basically means your team can swoop in, arm B, easily defend it, and you're on to the next set of objectives. Moving on now to the second set of Mcoms. Once more here we have 3 lanes. Let's start with talking about lane 1. Now lane 1, the A lane, is basically primarily for arming A. And simply put, you need to remove the defensive forces in your way here because they're going to make arming A basically impossible. Once you have, usually this Mcom is relatively quick to fall. Defensive forces don't usually kind of put too much effort in defending A because B is so much harder to get for the offensive forces. So defensive forces like to concentrate on defending that one. You may want to watch from people flanking in from the left side of A from the attacker's position. So that is northwest, I believe. Northwest. So you may want to watch from people coming out of the river there to disarm A, but otherwise that should be relatively easily done. Now lane 2 is your primary attack lane for B, and it's going to kind of end in the fighting beneath the structures or above the structures, and there's not too much tactics here. It's close quarter combat. The better team hopefully will win. The smart move you can make though, however, is take lane 3, and the reason why this is so intelligent is because the defensive forces can set up pretty strong defenses on the hills and behind the truck around objective B, making arming it very difficult because yes, it is in a little house, but 1 minute into the game, that house has just been blown up 20 different times, so there's nothing much left of cover around objective B. So if you take lane 3, you usually can snag a number of kills and actually help your team massively because you stop the flow of defending forces onto objective B. Another thing to note about this second set of Mcoms is that it can be very effective to play the underground part of the Mcom, simply because you can kind of peek out from beneath the wooden structures constantly and kind of spot people and shoot people without them realizing it. You just have to pay attention, obviously, that somebody doesn't jump down behind you and knife you in the back. Now, I'm not really sure what the best way is to arm A and B. I think basically you need to make use of all 3 lanes and just throw at it what you've got. But if I would have a tip or trick or something I tend to do a lot if I find my team struggling to arm B, is I do take lane 3, which is something you don't see every round. And as with the first set of Mcoms, lane 3 provides you an opportunity to kind of shoot people which are usually behind cover and think themselves safe. So it's a very effective route to take. Moving on now to the third set of Mcoms. We have here now for once a picture from the defensive perspective, because I do occasionally actually play this map from the defensive perspective as well. Once more here we have lanes 1, 2 and 3, basically lane B, lane A, and then kind of one in between. The one in between actually being the most important. But let's start with lane B or lane 1. Now here basically you're going to be mostly close quarter with quite a bit of medium distance combat as well, and you're going to be fighting through the few houses at the beginning and then through the jungle. It's basically a straight push to the Mcom. Work the cover well that you have, the differences in height, and once you've armed B, make sure that not too many people can jump down from the cliffs up top. As you can see nicely on the map here, their spawn isn't too far away and they can easily kind of flank you round B. So lane 1 is a simple push towards the objective. Next one I actually want to talk about is not lane 2 but lane 3. I'm going to save the best for last. Lane 3 is over the hills and down into A. If you can effectively take it, it can be a very effective position to set up quite a bit of crossfire on the hill opposite of A and down, of course, on the A objective itself. But it's very easy for the enemies to flank around back up there and get you eventually from behind, because their spawn allows them quite easily to cross the road in the village, thus allowing them to get back up to those hills. So be careful when you're fighting from that position. Again, here we've got more of a medium distance combat, so your average AEK may not be the best tool to use here. However, with lane 2, this is close quarter, and it's probably the most important lane. It is clearly the most important lane actually here with this set of Mcoms. And the reason is it basically allows you to arm both B and A. Without it, usually you can't successfully arm these objectives. And the simple reason is because it is so close quarter combat in the center of the map, which is exactly where this thing is, where lane 2 is, people can basically easily move from there to objective B and A relatively quickly, and they can usually actually fire at objective B and A from that position. So if you want to take objective A and especially objective B, I seldomly actually see a successful B arm without the team actually having taken most of lane 2 for themselves. You basically need to own that lane to be able to successfully push onto these 2 objectives, simply because otherwise, once more, you're going to have crossfire set up on you and you're going to be fighting 2 fronts, which is basically means you're going to lose. Coming to the final, the 4th set of Mcoms now. We have 2 lanes here, and the main reason is technically there would be 3, but the middle lane is so ineffective I don't really see anybody successfully use it ever, because it's basically running through the open. So you have lanes 1 and 2, lanes A and B again, driven by the objectives, and they're both basically flanking lanes. And the reason they are this is because yes, you can set up on the hills above the objectives and shoot into their defensive lines, but seldomly does a team win by doing that. You need to go and arm the objectives, and for that you need to actually get close enough to arm them, which means usually you see most people taking lane 2, and lane 2 is a medium range, ends in close quarter once you actually get in the base. You can hide behind some of the cover, but cover here is very limited. It's very easy for the defensive team to set up a huge amount of firepower, especially around B, So basically you have to run for it. You have to look for a break in the defensive forces when a few of them are down, and then you just have to run in there, get in close quarter. And once you're in close quarter, a few players are enough. Usually the defensive team then focuses on them, allowing the rest of the team to move up relatively easily without having to worry about the 20,000 bipod setup LMGs or snipers and DMR users. Very often you see the entire team clogging around this lane 2, this B lane. And to avoid that, there is lane 1. And this lane isn't always effective, but when it works out, it's the best lane to take. And the situation where you want to use lane A, or lane 1, is basically when all your team is on lane B. If a few players take that lane, usually no defensive force is expecting it. And it's not really even about arming objective A. Because with the final set of Mcoms, it's all about getting the team into that area. Because once you're there, you're in close quarter, usually you win. The defensive team's main job is to keep you away from crossing the river. Once you've crossed the river, usually you win. Most cases, not always, but usually you win. So if you can get into that vicinity of the area over lane 1, basically you allow your team to push up by just creating havoc within the defensive lines. You're flanking a bunch of people. You may get some nice knife kills if you play it nice and stealthy. You're helping your team a great lot, even though you're not actually probably going to arm an objective. If you're just 3 players, there's no point in arming objective A. They'll simply defuse it. However, if you can kill a bunch of defenders on your way around the base, you're basically helping your team move up, which is the most important part of this final and last objective. So what weapons are we looking at here? There's quite a bit of long range combat if you set up on the hill and you're using this, you're trying to shoot people from there. There's mid-range combat when you're trying to cross the river, but as soon as you get into the ruined temple, it's all the way close quarter, and it's all about throwing those numbers at the Mcoms, removing those defenders or keeping the offenders off the objective, depending which team you're playing, and getting those things armed or preventing it. So how balanced is the map overall? How does it play out? Well, I find this very difficult to answer simply because you will very often have games where you have a very dominant team and a very weak team simply from a player skill perspective, which means obviously one of them is going to win. But I would say it's pretty much 50-50. If you flank properly and if you play this map properly and you're not playing against a team full of gods, usually you have a fair shot at winning this map. And what I very much like about this map is that there's a lot of variety in its playstyle. First of all, most Mcoms are actually hard. There's no really kind of pushover easy Mcoms in this map, A. B, the last Mcom is the hardest, which I find is kind of the way Rush should be, but sadly not every Rush map is actually set out that way. And lastly, you have a little bit of long distance combat, a substantial amount of middle distance, and a substantial amount of close quarter combat, which is exactly what I personally prefer. I love a bit of close quarter and mid-range combat. I don't always want to be sniping from 100 meters away, and I think Battlefield needs a few more close quarter or mid-range rush maps, so this makes a very nice addition. And with that being said, all that can be said has been said. Now, if you found this video at all helpful or entertaining or interesting, leave a comment below or a like to let me know. If you have personal experiences with this map, tactics or flanking routes, or think I've actually forgotten something, feel free to share that below in the comments. I'll be very interested to see how you think this map should be played from an offensive or defensive position, and maybe you have lanes that I was not aware of or didn't use myself and that I've forgotten to include here. So feel free to leave those down below in the comments. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next Battlefield 4 video.